and we're live on Facebook.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kumar Rao. I'm an attorney and Director of Justice Policy and Campaigns at the Center for Popular Democracy. We're going to get started with today's National Emergency Webinar on COVID-19 and its impact and implications for people trapped in the criminal, legal, and immigration detention systems. We want to encourage everyone to join this discussion here and after the webinar online using a few different hashtags: decarcerate COVID-19, humanity not cages, and hashtag no COVID in jails. As you see, we also have ASL interpreters available throughout that webinar. And if you'd like, you can pin the interpreter screen so that they're always visible irrespective of the speaker. And you can send a message to the Justice Collaborative in the chat box if you need any assistance. So we gather today in one of the most daunting and challenging moments of our lifetimes. Indeed, to call this moment challenging feels like an understatement. Very few crises in our modern era have touched and affected literally every single person in our country and indeed the globe. We are all facing personal and professional hardships simply to manage our daily lives. And somehow government systems and certain leaders appear unequipped to meet this moment with the moral clarity and practical intervention needed to protect our nation's people. We also know that all of us are being called upon to do our part in mitigating the harm and spread of this virus and to protect the most vulnerable among us. And who really more vulnerable than individuals held against their will, held in confined, tight spaces, sometimes literal cages, with little to no access to basic hygiene products, running water, medical care, or physical separation from other people, some of whom may be ill. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, governments in the United States hold almost 2.3 million people in state prisons, federal prisons, juvenile correctional facilities, local jails, Indian country jails, as well as in military prisons, immigration detention facilities, civil commitment centers, state psychiatric hospitals, and prisons in the US territories. These staggering numbers reveal that we are already in a crisis of criminalization and incarceration in our country. So needless to say, figuring out how to protect and mitigate harm of the virus in these sprawling and complex systems is daunting, but we know is equally necessary. So as coronavirus and the fear surrounding its spread causes even greater concern among the nation around the world, we want to be able to encourage quick, smart policy changes and interventions, particularly for the most vulnerable, that can alleviate this growing crisis and make our communities safer and healthier sooner. As a result, it's critical we act now to mitigate the eventual harm that COVID-19 will inflict on incarcerated people, staff who work in spaces, and impacted communities. So that's what we're talking about and why we are here today, why several organizations, including my own, the Center for Popular Democracy, the Justice Collaborative, the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, and Faith in Action, and many other institutions felt the moral calling to bring this webinar together and to offer ideas, interventions, demands, and to surface requests for support. We really are aiming here to create greater awareness of this potential crisis in our jails and prisons, and to really spark action across jurisdictions, across levels of government, and to support community organized mutual aid efforts to get people out of jails and prisons, first and foremost, and to protect and provide proper treatment for any people still incarcerated. So we're looking forward to hearing from our expert panelists and the audience, all of you, about some of the concrete things we can do over the next month, who is doing them, and if there are impediments, which we know there are, identifying the people who can make those changes happen and what resources are needed to get it done. We know through this crisis, even just over the last couple of weeks, we will not be able to protect one another without coordination and communication and a commitment to our most vulnerable brethren. We are truly in this fight together. So with that, I want to turn it over to Josie Duffy Rice, who is a lawyer, a journalist, a friend of mine, and president of The Appeal, a news organization devoted to covering the criminal justice system, to take us through today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Kumar. And thank you everybody for joining. Like Kumar said, my name is Josie Duffy Rice. I'm a lawyer and a journalist and currently serve as the president of The Appeal, a news organization that produces original journalism about the criminal justice system. I want to just reiterate quickly what Kumar said. You know, I think we're realizing, especially at this moment, how many people have told us for generations that the point of pouring people into prisons and jails is to maintain safety. And we know that's not true. We've known that that isn't true for a while, but this really puts into stark realization that fact. When we allow our neighbors and our communities and our societies to suffer, we are all at risk. This is a really terrifying time. It's a serious crisis, and it's a reminder of our shared vulnerability. It clarifies what our values are, who we want to be, and now we have to act. So thank you everyone for joining us. Just a short layout of the agenda. We're going to have a few speakers talk briefly, 4 to 5 minutes each, about what the coronavirus means for people in the criminal justice system, and also more broadly. We're gonna, if you have questions, you can send them via Zoom, via the chat function. At the end, we're gonna ask a few of them. We won't be able to ask everything. And at the end, we're also gonna share some really specific recommendations of things that we can be talking to local, state, and federal officials about, as well as some more resources that will be available both online and that we can send out after the call is over. So I have the great honor of introducing Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. You know, she's just been such a champion for working people and all people in her short time in Congress, and we're so grateful that she's joining us. Congresswoman Pressley is a representative from Massachusetts' 7th Congressional District. She's a key ally in Congress, someone directly impacted by the criminal legal system, who is fighting for a transformation of the justice system and for advancing a real vision for public safety. She's been a chief architect of the Justice Guarantee and worked with groups like CPD, like Color of Change, like Andrea James and the National Council in her time in Congress. And she's been outspoken since this crisis began about the need to protect incarcerated people from the coronavirus. So I'm going to turn it over to Representative Pressley, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Josie, and thank you, Kumar. Thank you for convening this and bringing us all together. But most importantly, thank you for the work that you do every single day. You know, honestly, you all have been our teachers in this movement, pushing us and holding us accountable. And I just appreciate you immensely. And I appreciate Kumar saying this is a moral calling. It is absolutely that. As we face this pandemic, it is clear that every socio-racial economic fault line in our society is being highlighted and exacerbated in this moment. And I'm just grateful for your allyship and your leadership in this fight to affirm that there is no hierarchy of value, humanity, and so there should not be a hierarchical response ever, but certainly not in the midst of a pandemic. I'm going to walk through just some of the things in my capacity, given my committee assignments, and again, informed by the good advocacy and leadership of folks on this call. Of course, I'm going to give a special shout out to Andrea James. She certainly has been one of my sheroes in this work and is a constituent. And then my colleague and sister in service in government, Representative Johanna Hayes, is also on the line from Connecticut, and she's been a strong ally in this fight as well. So what we know for sure is that the federal government can take additional and important steps today to ensure the safety and the well-being of immigrants and incarcerated people. I serve on the House Oversight and Reform Committee. This is one of 2 committees that I sit on, and we have the authority to call in the BOP, the Bureau of Prisons, and the Department of Homeland Security and other federal agencies to determine what steps they are taking to plan, prevent, contain, any potential spread of this virus. Just this week, myself and Representatives Ocasio-Cortez, Velasquez, and Tlaib sent a letter to the Bureau of Prisons demanding they answer those very questions. I was coming to this call to say that they have failed to respond in the time allocated and outlined in the letter. I have learned that they, based on my line of questioning yesterday in the Oversight and Reform Committee about whether or not there was any guidance for the BOP, as I was joining this call, I learned that they have responded. I have not yet had an opportunity to review that guidance. But again, it is a testament to the power of our collective vigilance and our using every tool available to make sure that when we are talking about protecting the most vulnerable, that is including incarcerated men and women. We also need to make sure that Customs, Border and Protection, CBP, and ICE facilities are meeting minimum health standards and that they have the equipment, hand sanitizers, running water, and protocols necessary to screen, to diagnose, and to treat detainees in the case that there is a COVID-19 case there. I'm still haunted by the subpar conditions that I saw when I visited the border in El Paso last year. We know that those conditions already, whether you're talking about detention facilities or correctional facilities, our prisons, are already a petri dish and an ecosystem that support the growth of disease, period, and certainly a pandemic. I'm still reeling from the exploitation and the ironic contradiction that in New York, that we would have incarcerated men and women producing hand sanitizer for 26 cents an hour that they cannot even access themselves, since you all well know that this sanitizer is 70% alcohol, and hand sanitizer has been banned in prisons because of the presence of alcohol. And so, you know, the exploitive nature of this, they would be producing something to keep everyone else safe, but they cannot access it themselves. The other thing that I pushed and highlighted in the committee on, in the Oversight and Reform Committee yesterday during my line of questioning was just to push on compassionate release and community-based alternatives to detention. The Bureau of Prison has the authority to push for compassionate release, as you all know, of elderly incarcerated people who pose no threat to society. And we have to all continue to urge them to use this existing authority expeditiously to ensure that those most at risk of complications for infections are not living in high-risk environments like prison or jail. ICE and CBP must also look to community-based alternatives to detention to alleviate the mass overcrowding in our detention facilities, particularly for elderly, pregnant women, and those with higher risk of infection. Finally, I pushed on the issue of clemency. You know, on any given night in America, there are 500,000 people in prison and jail who have not even been convicted of crimes, but simply because they cannot afford bail, they are still being detained. This is unconscionable. These are mothers and primary caretakers, people who have committed low-level offenses, if any at all. And as Brian Stevenson says, crimes don't go to prison, people do. And as Angela Davis reminds us, you know, they don't fix social issues. What they do is break human beings. So, you know, trauma does not treat trauma. And that's what's happening over and over and over again. But again, you all know this because you've been leading in these spaces for such a long time. So I'll continue in solidarity with each of you to urge this administration and our state officials to use every tool available to them, including clemency power, to review petitions for commutation, both to reduce overcrowding and to prevent a potentially devastating spread of infectious disease. And then finally, I will do that and my staff as well. We'll continue to be in touch. And then the other thing is that I just wanted to underscore how important it is that any avenues to maintain familial bonds, that these things should all be free. You know, these are things that we've all been fighting for a long time, but this pandemic gives us an opportunity gives us an opportunity to push that even more so. If visits are going to be canceled as a way to a strategy of containment, and people are not going to be able to see their loved ones, then any video conferencing and phone calls and things like that should be free. So I look forward to hearing what else folks, what expertise, to learn from the expertise from those on this call that will inform our advocacy, again, in using every tool available to us on the federal level to protect our loved ones that are behind the wall.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Presley. Thank you so much for your work, and we really appreciate you joining the call. I learned a lot. I have a lot of questions, but I'll wait till the end to ask them. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Homer Venters. Dr. Venters is the former Chief Medical Officer for New York City jails, and he'll talk to us a little bit about health systems in jails and what is needed right now.
Thank you very much, and thanks for including me in this conversation. I'm really in awe of the advocacy and the effective policy promotion of the other people on the call, and certainly appreciative of all the feedback that I think we're going to get as we hear from people who are listening. As everybody, I think, knows generally, healthcare behind bars is poor and inadequate because it has been designed to be that way. When I say that, I mean that the things that promote quality healthcare in the community are generally absent behind bars. Many of the institutions we hear about every day, many times a day right now, the Centers for Disease Control, our state and local departments of health, the Joint Commission, accrediting hospitals, most of these organizations that help us understand what's good quality healthcare and what's bad, they're not around. They're AWOL when it comes to healthcare behind bars. We've left a lot of the most important decisions about the scope, transparency, and quality of healthcare to sheriffs and commissioners of correction that aren't able and simply can't do these jobs. And so now we're faced with a situation where we have a pandemic that does not respect the borders of any institution. We all would agree that the virus can go into a school or a library, a prison or a jail also. But unfortunately, we built these health systems as very separate. And so we have places that we've filled up with disproportionately people of color, but also people who have serious medical and behavioral health problems into these boxes, these places that promote the transmission of communicable diseases. The lack of infection control, the lack of basic access to hand washing, the reliance on punishment as a means to respond to health problems, chronic understaffing, all of this means that when coronavirus comes into these communities around the country, it will also come into the jails, and it's likely to spread quite rapidly. Also, these health services are simply not connected. The public health officials and teams that are responding, that are directing the response. And so one of my real concerns is that critical decisions about where our test kit's going to go, who goes to the hospital, as we get fewer and fewer available hospital beds, we really have to ensure that access to all of these resources is meted out on a clinical basis, not on a basis of somebody's criminal justice status. So there are some things we can do right now. Some of them have already been alluded to. I think others will echo some of these sentiments. The first and simplest is that these facilities need to pay attention to and dedicate energy to competent infection control. We hear a lot about hand washing as the most important tool. Most of the jails and prisons I've been into around the country don't really have enough sinks. And certainly if there's a sink that works, there's often not paper towels, there's not soap. And so these the most basic infection control tool that we hear about constantly is out of the reach of many people behind bars. This certainly goes if you happen to find yourself in an intake pen, going into a county jail, in a congregate setting where there are a lot of people. And so that's a basic element, the access to hand washing, hand sanitizer, other basic tools of infection control. I think that more broadly, these facilities need to be able to manage the response of their response when people develop symptoms. And what I mean by that is, if there's a housing area with 40 people and 3 of them develop symptoms, then a standard practice would be for those 3 to go into a separate housing area where they have their symptoms checked every day, where they're afforded tests, and then if they are positive or if they need hospitalization, they go to a higher level of care. This basic element of outbreak management is almost impossible in facilities that are full. So many of our 5,000 jails, prisons, and immigration detention centers are full. And so their ability to manage people with symptoms versus people without symptoms, people who are sick and people who are well, is really hampered. It's an uphill battle if they don't have room to do this. And so that's one of the primary reasons that a very important consideration right now is how do we find people that are at risk? How do we get them out of these facilities? And how do we give the managers of these facilities, sheriffs and commissioners of correction, the ability to conduct a competent response? I think I'll just end with one final plea, which is that all of us should go to commissioners of health, state departments of health, and push them to say, what are the criteria that are going to be used in the community for access to testing and access to inpatient hospital beds? And how can we ensure that that standard is applied evenly across our society? And there isn't a double standard applied, as it has always been for people who are incarcerated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Venters. That was really helpful, and I really appreciate you making the point that we finally need to connect these institutions to our community-based systems of health. That's critical, and I thank you for joining us. Next, we have Barbara Suarez-Galeano. She's the organizing director for the Detention Watch Network. Thank you so much for joining us, Barbara.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. So yeah, like I said, my name is Barbara Suarez-Galeano. I use she, her, they pronouns, and I'm the organizing director for Detention Watch Network. DWN is a national coalition of over 100 organizational members working together to abolish immigrant detention. And overall, our main response to the global pandemic stemming from COVID-19 is to call on Acting Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Matthew Albans, to use his discretion to order the release of all people in ICE custody and cease all enforcement and removal operations immediately. We have heard time and time again, experts recommend people implement strict social distancing practices as a response to COVID-19, and this is practically impossible for those inside detention centers. By definition, the conditions of mass confinement created by immigrant detention pose a serious threat to public health. And this, coupled with ICE's long-standing and well-documented history of medical neglect, abuse, and malnourishment of people detained, is a recipe for disaster. Lives are already at risk in detention, and with the spread of coronavirus, people are sitting ducks in a notoriously fatally flawed medical care system. These effects are particularly compounded for Black migrants, trans migrants, Southeast Asian migrants, people with disabilities, and other further marginalized groups of people in detention who are caged at higher rates, face extreme conditions of confinement, indefinite detention, and a higher likelihood of being ordered deported. The government can and should release all people from detention immediately, and it's important that we recognize that ICE has the power to use its discretion to do this right now. I think it's important for us to remember that this year alone, this fiscal year alone, which started in October of this year, we've seen 8 reported deaths in ICE custody. And this number is already the equivalent of the total deaths that we saw in the fiscal year 2019. So in just 5 months, we've seen the amount of deaths that have happened, in the entirety of last year. Many people in detention are already suffering from the compounded effects of being immunocompromised and languishing under prolonged detention. So the threat of COVID-19 only adds on to this. Detention centers across the country, including geo-operated Adelanto, Northwest Detention Center, and Aurora in Colorado, have a history of outbreaks, including mumps, scabies, chickenpox, and other highly contagious diseases. The conditions of mass confinement and consistent medical neglect pose a threat to our entire communities. This is an argument that we have made for a long time, but this particularly highlights in this moment of gravity the risk and the need for us to do away with the detention of immigrants overall. Suspending all removal and enforcement operations is crucial, to ensure that people's needs are put first and we are not continuing to drive vulnerable populations into the dangerous and lethal conditions associated with mass detention. For us, this moment shows us the deep disparities that exist between our government's priorities and what our communities need to survive. Currently, ICE has an annual budget of $4.4 billion for enforcement, detention, and removal operations. What if those resources were instead allocated towards a comprehensive public response to a crisis such as this one? We're tired of having to argue for the humanity of our people and to see our communities decimated by the constant raids and looming threat of deportations from ICE. We want to highlight the grassroots organizing that's already taking place in places like Washington, Texas, and California, where folks have been mobilizing to call not just on ICE field directors, but also on their local and state officials, including sheriffs, city councils, and health departments to intervene and pressure ICE to release all people detained. Now is the time for us to follow their example and act boldly and in coordination. For us, the priority right now is kind of circulating a lot of these materials, templates for folks to use for call-ins. And also some of our members, I know Just Futures Law just came out with templates for folks to apply for humanitarian release for their people. So we're definitely circulating those and super excited to be part of this with y'all and to coordinate together to figure out how to best support everyone detained and get as many people caged out.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I really appreciate that. And thank you for joining us. Next, we have the inimitable Patrisse Cullors, co-founder of Black Lives Matter, founder of Dignity and Power Now, the chair of Reform LA Jails. And she'll talk to us a little bit about what's happening in the county system and other things that people can do. Thank you so much, Patrisse.
Thank you. And hey, everybody, both the presenters. So grateful for each of you and the work that you're holding down and this moment that feels like an Octavia Butler novel. And also to the audience that have come on today to just both check in, get some more information, but also I think there's something really powerful about trying to stay connected in this moment when we're all being asked to social distance or asked to self-isolate. Some of us, this kind of practice is actually antithetical to our well-being. And so I just want to really name how much gratitude I have for this crew and, what we're trying to do, the Appeal, TJC, all the work that you've done to bring so many of us together under a banner, both in the criminal legal system, but now with this pandemic. In the state of California, there's been declared a state of emergency. Every day there's a new person with the virus. Our universities have either suspended classes or have moved classes online. We live in the epicenter of Hollywood, so lot by lot is being asked to shut down. Writers' rooms are going, using Zoom for the first time. And while all this is happening, there is a significant insufficient preparation for this virus. And that is Los Angeles County at its finest. Our county jails are the most populated in the country. We have about 17,000 prisoners on a daily basis. Just at the end of last year, the jail system was at 136% capacity, as 6 of the 7 facilities were overpopulated by as much as 87%. Our jails are, like many of the jails across the country, full of the most vulnerable people and communities, people who are impacted by chronic homelessness, drug dependency, people with severe mental illness, people who are gravely disabled, and often receiving little to no care inside of our current jail system. Recently released individuals have started to speak out about this, that the unsanitary practices and the overcrowding in our jails. Someone who grew up in LA County with loved ones in and out of jails, I know firsthand staph infections people would come home with, the blood and fecal matter that would be smeared across walls, some of the most inhumane environments in our country are happening right here in the LA County jail system. And so imagine what would happen if, in fact, COVID-19 hits our jails. It's not an if, it's actually a when, given the situation in Los Angeles County. We know that COVID-19 poses the greatest risk to the elderly, those who are immunocompromised because of pre-existing medical conditions, often because of our lack of mental health and physical health care in our county. Our aging population is being impacted the most. And so we're really sort of in a dire situation. We have a few targets, as any good organizer or organizations would have. Many folks, groups like Justice LA, ACLU, Reform LA Jails, Dignity and Power Now, the Justice Collaborative, really coming together to call on specific entities. The county sheriff, Alex Villanueva, most folks know about his terrible history here in Los Angeles. Obviously, our district attorney, Jackie Lacey, most folks know about her terrible history here in Los Angeles, and our Superior Court system, and the Board of Supervisors. I just want to be clear with this team that, for the last decade, many of us have been on the ground pushing and challenging the County Board of Supervisors, the Sheriff's Department, the DA office, and many other powerful offices to rearrange how they understand harm and punishment harm and violence in our county. I think, for those of us who've been on the front lines of really calling forth abolition in our states or in our counties, have been seen as fringe or crazy. But now, in the midst of a global pandemic, groups like Justice LA being led by Lex Stepling and Yvette Ale and Mark Anthony Johnson and Eunices Hernandez are all really being seen as, okay, what do we do now? And so much of what we're doing in this moment is actually a light for public officials who have historically seen us as crazy. And so I just want to kind of name and ground down for the organizers, both who are presenting and who are listening. Our work often is ahead. It's future oriented, it's innovative, it's creative. It allows for a new vision for the places that we're living. It allows for us to really call in the greatest dignity for our communities, the greatest care for our communities. And no one ever imagines that a global pandemic is going to hit your neighborhood. And now that it has, so much of our vision, I think we can really channel it in this moment. And so some of the things that we're asking for in our county is early release, eliminate the overcrowding by creating the space and infrastructure that will be needed to care for the sick by immediately releasing any and all individuals whose release will not pose a serious physical safety risk to the community, and any and all individuals with 30 days or less of their sentence remaining. We don't need people to be sitting inside the county jails who are literally just sitting there. A lot of these are going to be on the TJC website as well, but immediately suspend arrests and or booking. So right now, the focus actually should be on getting enough test kits so we can get more information on who's well, who isn't well, and who needs to be taken care of, not citing people, not arresting people. Those are just some for the sheriff, some for our DA. Advocate for the release of all medically fragile adults and adults over the age of 55. So medically fragile adults, people who have severe mental illness who are sitting inside a jail cell that could actually be in a community bed, adults who are over the age of 55, people who are seniors, who are disabled, that can be home with their families or in a facility where they can get more care that's not a jail. Advocate, this is also for our DA, advocate for the immediate release of anyone within 6 months of completing their sentence and all individuals charged with an offense that does not involve a serious physical safety risk to the community. All these things are completely in our sheriff's jurisdiction, DA jurisdiction. Some demands for the county superior court, default to non-custodial sentences. So you get someone in who has drug dependency, don't send them to jail. Reduce the number of in-person court appearances, decline to issue failure to appear warrants, cancel all probation, parole, and pretrial meetings. I mean, there are so many ways that we can minimize the risk at this moment. And for our Board of Supervisors, issue an urgent statement explaining why adherence to community demands for immediate COVID-19 related changes to the arrest and detention practices of the Sheriff's Department and District Attorney's Office is vital for the health and safety of the entire County of Los Angeles. We need our Board of Supervisors to be the champions of making sure that our folks who are inside jails are getting the treatment they need, or being released the way they need to be released. Require the development of COVID-19 related protocol plans. The county has not really said anything about what their plans are. We need them to provide that. Commit to providing vulnerable houseless residents and recently released individuals with safe and sanitary community-based housing alternatives. We have a significant amount of empty buildings, empty hotels, empty lots that we can present to community members that are houseless, and taking it a step further, in this opportunity to commit to getting houseless people homes, we can actually say, and after COVID-19, here are the homes that you could stay in. That is most important in this moment, is not temporary fixes. This can be an opportunity where we fix things for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrice. I just want to agree with what Patrice said and make the point that, you know, if this gets 10 times worse, 100 times worse, it's going to be really easy for folks to forget the people in immigration detention right now, forget the people in prison, forget the people in jails, and forget the people in the system. So the time to act is now, the time to move to get people out is now, and we can make a really strong public health case of why now is the time. I also want to say a ton of people, attendees are on. We have more than 1,500 people on right now. That's incredible. And you guys are sending in some incredible resources, talking about the work that your groups are doing, asking great questions. So please keep it coming. It's really, really incredible to see what we're getting, and we'll make sure to try to coalesce everything when the call is over. Next, I want to introduce David Patton, if he is on. Oh, he is on. Okay, great. David is the Executive Director and the Attorney-in-Chief of the Federal Defenders of New York. Thank you so much for joining us, David.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this. So I'm the Executive Director of the Federal Defenders of New York. We represent people charged with federal crimes who can't afford a lawyer in the southern and eastern districts of New York. So that's New York City and its surrounding areas. Our detained clients who are held pending trial or sentencing are incarcerated at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in downtown Manhattan, or at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, the MCC and the MDC. The MCC holds a little over 700 people. The MDC holds about 1,500 people. They're run by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which I don't know if anybody has mentioned this yet on the call, but just about an hour ago, we got word that nationwide, the Federal Bureau of Prisons has suspended all legal and social visiting at all federal prisons throughout the country. So in other words, we just started a nationwide lockdown, which is one of the things we've been most concerned about happening. In the best of times, the MCC and MDC are unsanitary, unhygienic, overcrowded places. They are god-awful places. There are mice and rat infestations. There are, twice in the past year, there have been raw sewage floods at the MCC. There is a constant lack of appropriate medical care. I could go on, and again, that's in the best of times. Recently, even leaving coronavirus aside, these have not been the best of times. The MCC was locked down for 10 days just recently, just opening back up 2 days ago, while the guards searched for contraband. Because the people detained there are the ones who clean the jail, it was not cleaned for 10 days. Some of the units of more than 25 people, because the aggressiveness of the search knocked out one of the toilets, are sharing a single toilet. People are in cells that were built for one person, but now because it's so overcrowded, there are two people in them sharing a single toilet and sink, oftentimes not functioning properly. People weren't able to shower for days at a time. Bed sheets and clothes were not changed. Again, I could go on and on. And now, on top of that, we're injecting the coronavirus threat. As others have talked about, many of the people detained meet the CDC's high risk category criteria. They are over the age of 60 and or have serious medical problems. The BOP does not operate these facilities responsibly in the best of times. I can't possibly describe to you the lack of transparency, the utter disregard for the welfare of our clients, and I just have no confidence that they are going to handle this crisis responsibly. We have had to drag them kicking and screaming to meetings to tell us anything at all about what they're doing, and even then we get very little information. I agree with what others have said, that we need to immediately think about getting people out of those places. The easiest and most obvious place to start are the people that fall into that CDC high risk category. Elderly people and people who are medically compromised need to be released now before it's too late. We know that this poses a real threat, and if those folks contract the virus, especially if they contract it in a jail setting, their lives are at risk. We also just need to think about ways, as others have talked about, of reducing the population generally beyond even the high risk category, because we're about to run into an enormous staffing issue at these facilities. I know my office is running into a staffing issue. Every business, every organization in the country is running into a staffing issue, and the BOP is not going to be any different. In fact, it could be worse because the correctional officers are not going to want to be in those facilities. So you're about to take institutions that already don't run properly, that already have serious staffing issues in the best of times, and it's about to get worse. If you can reduce the populations, it makes being able to respond to situations that arise enormously easier. You can have the room and the space to deal appropriately with medical emergencies, to get people out and to get the appropriate people in. And lastly, we need to dramatically change how we're putting people into those facilities right now. And by that, I mean, we need to stop it. Federal prosecutors in my line of work need to dramatically change their practice in terms of initiating cases and seeking detention in the cases where they have initiated. That's all I've got for now. Happy to answer questions.
Thanks, David. You know, I think one of the things we've been talking about a lot at our organization is the fact that even on lockdown, right, people who work there go in and out. They have sick kids at home. They have elderly parents. They're also a risk to their community. So this idea that just putting people on lockdown will protect them or protect the rest of us is wrong. And so I really appreciate you emphasizing that. And thank you for joining us. Next, we have one of my very favorite people, Andrea James, from the founder of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And she's going to talk to us, give us a little bit update of people who are, and especially women who are currently incarcerated, and talk about their experiences. So thank you so much, Andrea.
Hi, thanks so much, everybody. I hope I unmuted myself. Yeah, great. I want to give a big shout out to the interpreter. She is keeping us rocking and rolling, and I know to interpret all of these different voices and people is a huge monumental task. So big shout out to the interpreter. I also want to just shout out all the people that are putting some really incredibly important and helpful information into the chat. Those of us that are have the privilege of being on this webinar are just a drop in the bucket, really, of all of the people that have been on the ground across the country in their hyperlocal communities, nationally and everywhere else, working so hard on these issues long before this immediate crisis has come to be. And so we're from the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. We started organizing ourselves as incarcerated women in the federal prison for women in Danbury, Connecticut in 2010, as we heard the uptick and increase in dialogue about the need to end incarceration. However, we heard nothing to very little about women, separation of mothers from their children, the health impacts on women as a result of incarceration, and lack of attention of the needs of women, all things that were outlined in a report by the Office of the Inspector General, Department of Justice, that has already identified the lack of adherence to the BOP policies pertaining to incarcerated women. That report has also already pointed out the less than adequate, poor management of women regarding the state of healthcare and the conditions of confinement based on a gender analysis. So the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls is a result of our intention to organize ourselves within a national platform of connectivity and support to work collectively towards the goal of ending incarceration of women and girls. And we do that now under our long-term work, reimagining communities and connecting the local neighborhood work led by incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls. So for us, one of the points that we want to emphasize, a lot of good information that we don't need to repeat has already been said, but what we would like to just really emphasize is that for us, when we speak of addressing the issues affecting community, community includes our people inside. We're in constant communication with incarcerated women and many men in state and federal prisons and jails across the country. We have ongoing and consistent surveys, campaigns, projects that keep us connected, all led by our staff members, all formerly incarcerated women and girls, our movement lawyers and interns who gather information and work to get people out of prison and protect them while they are there. Examples of this is our oversight of the First Step Act on the federal level, our national state clemency campaign, working to move women out of state prisons, and the daily points of crisis we respond to daily brought to our attention by incarcerated women, including rapes, suicides, health crises, and myriad issues affecting their families on the outside. Specifically regarding this most recent urgent health concern, as expressed in the letter to their governor of Indiana, I want to lift up Kelsey Kaufman and our sisters and comrades in Indiana, where they stated that prisons are known incubators and amplifiers of disease. Once a virus like COVID-19 enters a prison, it's almost certain to infect the entire prison population. And so that is including all employees. At the National Council, we immediately began to receive information from inside about the concerns of women regarding the coronavirus and the lack of response to their concerns, the downplaying of undiagnosed virus-like conditions and illness that are currently occurring, and we're receiving out information about those things. In reference again to us being part of one community, when we hear about the CDC and other health organizations' recommendations that mostly encourage spacing and distancing, we know for sure that in a large population like a prison or a jail, we know that it's not possible to create that type of separation and spacing in our prisons and jails. We want to shout out to our legal intern, Gabby Ritz-Session, who's been working day and night with our lawyer, Catherine Shevchenko, who is continuing to compile a spreadsheet of incarcerated women, reporting to us illness in the prisons across the country, federal and state, and also prisons and jails that have canceled visits. She's also continuing to monitor closures in other community, large populations that we can make a comparison from, for instance, such as colleges and universities. Colleges and universities, as we all know, are mostly comprised of young people who the statistics of what we're receiving from the health organizations are telling us have very good chances of this not affecting them in a very critical way unless they have already a compromised immune system. But those communities are closing for indefinite periods of time. They're sending their students home to keep the virus from spreading. In the prisons, in the federal prison, 19.5% of the federal prison population are people over the age of 51. Many of them already struggling with health conditions. And overall, throughout the country, 25% of the incarceration population is over age 50. So we have to take into consideration that we're not two different separate communities. We should be addressing this as all one united community, all demanding for all of the recommendations that the CDC and these other health organizations, global health organizations, are recommending for people across the globe, that those recommendations should not be passed out or carved out when it comes to incarcerated people. They are all part of our community. Just to also lift up that for this crisis at hand, we say that hand sanitizer is necessary, but it's not the appropriate response. We need to encourage, one, the immediate stop of the flow of people into prisons, as we have heard from several of our speakers. We need, we've received a call. I want to give you, I want to take us out of a little bit as I'm getting to the end of my comments, just to let you know what this really actually in real time means to people. We received a call just an hour ago from our organizer, Christy Puckett, in North Carolina regarding a case where a judge has just denied the motion for a woman who's scheduled to self-surrender to the federal prison for women in West Virginia, a prison we are monitoring very closely, for we have been informed of undiagnosed cases there of illness in women. And this particular woman has just come through major surgery. She's in need of chemotherapy and intense treatment follow-up. She has a severely compromised immune system, yet the judge has just denied postponing her self-surrender to this prison in West Virginia, federal prison. So understanding the immediate need to stop the flow of people, particularly those people with already compromised immune systems and under serious health conditions, we need to stop the flow of those people into prisons and jails and detentions, immigration detention centers, or immigration prisons, because that's what they are. And that needs to happen immediately. We also need to use every opportunity to get people out, as many of us have already mentioned on this call. We need to use medical furlough, parole, compassionate release, and of course, clemency. We have a national state clemency campaign already underway, fully working with state committees across the country that can be utilized to help to move women out who we have already identified that have compromised health and are elderly. Our framework for everything that we do, but particularly in light of this pandemic, is release, release, release. And we need to be working from a framework that starts from release, not hand sanitizer. Lastly, in my closing, I'd like to lift up the families who are holding themselves together during the incarceration in general of their loved ones. The level of disruption within families caused by incarceration is already impossible to manage, as we know from the work of Gina Clayton and SC Justice Group, as we know from Ebony Underwood and We Got Us Now, and many others working to raise awareness of the impact of incarceration on children and families on the outside. And we encounter a crisis that increases the level of stress and worry and struggle on families, particularly those worrying about the effects of a virus like COVID-19, and they're incarcerated, particularly the concern of families with their incarcerated elderly mothers and fathers. Our prisons and jails, particularly our prisons, our federal and state prisons, are crammed full of elderly people, elderly women, elderly men, our grandmothers, there are grandfathers in there. We want to raise them up and remind us all that the real epidemic here is prisons. The real epidemic here is incarceration. And now is an opportunity to begin an intentional national drumbeat, an intentional national push towards abolition and starting anew toward a system centered on humanity, a global community fighting for humanity on behalf of us all that values all of our lives. And let's start by stopping the flow of people in and bringing out immediately, please, those who are elderly and of frail health. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I think first, we have a lot of family members on this call right now, and I really appreciate you centering them and mentioning just what a trying time this is in the midst of what is already always a trying experience.
Yeah, and I think I'll shut up after this, but Rep. Presley mentioned the fact that we not only do we need free phone calls, Rep, we also, just so you know what else to say to them, we need to have an extension or an elimination of the limit of minutes. Families not only have to endure the cost of the phone calls, but we also in a crisis have to navigate around having only a few minutes per phone call and so many minutes per month. That doesn't work in a crisis like this. We need to be able to freely speak to our loved ones.
Yeah, and I also really appreciate you pointing out, the need for mass release right now. It's been done in states like Alabama, right, in the past, due to court order, and we're at a point where we really need to be. We've been at a point, but we're at especially an inflection point where we really need to be talking about that. We have a few more people that are going to speak, and then we're going to do a quick wrap up and talk about things that people can do next and resources, and then we'll answer a couple of questions depending on time. So quickly, I just wanted to Erica Andiola, the Chief Advocacy Officer at Raices, who's going to talk next.
Yeah, hi everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Perfect. Thank you so much for putting this call together. And, I hope everybody's taking some time to breathe. There's so much going on. There's already been a lot of really great information from other folks as far as what is going on detention, on immigrant detention. And so I'm not going to add more information to that. What I will quickly just focus on is, our own current experience within Raices and our clients, and what we're really trying to do right now to get them to be free. So just to give a little bit of background, Raices, we provide immigrant legal services for immigrants in the state of Texas and all of Texas, and we also provide support for immigrant families across the nation. And right now, one of the programs that we do have is the family detention program, in which our attorneys basically do consultations, and we fight to get people out of detention, and in this case, family detention. Some of our attorneys also work in other immigrant detention facilities. Right now, we're focusing specifically on getting people out of Carnes Detention Center, which is a family detention facility, and also Pearsall Detention Center, which is in Texas as well. And just to tell you, just the stories right now that we're hearing, to give some context into why it's so important to release people at this moment. We did hear from our attorneys, specifically at Carnes right now. We have about 600 people who are in the detention facility. They're entire families. So they're fathers, mothers, and children. The situation it's not getting any better. We do have about 20 people, actually it's 20 families, not people, families who are very, very vulnerable at this moment. We have heard there's about 6 children that have cold, flu, and symptoms of some sort of illness. It's not necessarily coronavirus, but they are already sick, and we do have a history of struggling with getting them care from inside of the detention center. We currently have also 4 pregnant women that we are supporting and trying to get them out. And there's 14 babies under the age of 2 who are detained at this detention center. And so, just I'm mentioning this out of, just again, bringing the urgency that there are very, very vulnerable people. And, again, this is a family detention center. And so as you can imagine, there's even more vulnerability with children and pregnant women, but we also are pushing really hard to get some of our clients out of Pearsall Detention Center who are trans women we are representing and are HIV positive. And so for us, the most important thing right now is to, as our folks from the detention network were mentioning, there is a push to get people out of the facilities with parole, and so we're really pushing to convince the field officers to release these folks. We were supposed to have one of our, the director of our family detention program join this call, and she unfortunately was not able to join because they have just informed us that, you know, they're gonna stop visitation. We're not gonna be able to have attorneys visiting the facilities at this moment. And so it is crucial that they release these folks. If they're not releasing these entire families, we're not gonna be able to represent them as well as we should be representing them. And there's absolutely no reason why right now there's entire families detained in these facilities. And so we're going to continue to push for that. You can follow our Twitter. We're constantly putting updates on what's going on with these specific cases and these families. Also making a call for, you know, a sign on petition and calls to these field officers from ICE to release these entire families, and also our trans sisters that are right now in this situation and that can be the most vulnerable. And I'll just finish with saying that there's absolutely no support, there's absolutely no health. I don't even know how to put this, but we have had so many people sick at Carnes that we have been trying to get out of the detention center. And just one story that I'll finish, not too long ago, there was a child who he was a 1-year-old with nonstop diarrhea for 20 days. And it wasn't until we had several members of Congress calling to the detention center and a lot of people putting pressure that they decided to release the child with his father. And so this is an exact you know, example of what can happen and the extent to which we are going to be seeing these kinds of situations without the treatment that they need in detention. So people need to be released. And again, follow us at Raices Texas on Twitter. And, you know, we're going to be putting more calls to action as we continue to get these families and these individuals out of detention. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Erica. Next, we have Stephanie Morales. She's the Commonwealth's attorney for Portsmouth, Virginia, joining us to talk about what prosecutors and law enforcement's role is in reducing harm right now. Thank you so much, Commonwealth's attorney.
Thank you for having me. So first of all, as a member of the profession that has been known all throughout time for incarcerating people without regard for what the impacts of incarceration actually are on the members of our community who are incarcerated and their families, I have to say that I think this is the exact time that prosecutors need to be taking responsibility and accountability for figuring out in this time of crisis what we do to protect those who we serve who are incarcerated, the very people who we have in my profession put away without regard for what happens during times like this and at all other times when members of our community are suffering as a result of the incarceration, the over-incarceration that our country is grappling with now. And so specifically, I think all of the other panelists have done an excellent job of speaking to what some of the measures are that we can actually take to make an effort to correct the problem that we now have with over-incarceration and the risk that's associated with that, with the coronavirus spread. We have to just get in the trenches. You know, I think prosecutors have to work with public defenders and members of the defense bar who are willing and ready to step up and lead to try to get people out, whether it's by means of bringing to the court's attention matters where there's compassionate release that's appropriate or matters where people have been held. We need to be reconsidering bail and asking the court to grant bail, especially in instances where people are being held because of the inability to pay. We need to be looking at instances where people are being held without bail or awaiting sentencing who are have been convicted of nonviolent crimes or are awaiting trial on nonviolent crimes. And we really need to be rethinking why we're doing all the things we're doing as prosecutors and as member of law enforcement, and the impact that that could potentially have on the members, again, of our community who are incarcerated. Because once again, even though we are prosecutors and members of this profession and other professions have not looked at prosecutors as being responsible for members of the community who are incarcerated. We are more than responsible for what happens to people at the time, when they first have contact with law enforcement, through pre-trial, during trial, and post-trial, and during reentry to the community. We really have a duty, and we owe a duty to try to get it right by people. And so one of the things that I've done is work very closely with my public defender to agree to have a standing agreement for all reconsideration hearings, whether it's for matters that may involve compassionate release, whether it's for pretrial reconsideration on nonviolent offenses, or whether we're talking about instances where we have particularly vulnerable population members, or we have people who have less than 6 months to serve. There's a standing agreement that we will have all of these matters brought before the court, and it looks like our court is going to entertain every last one of those motions to make a determination about what we can do to protect those members of our community who are incarcerated, and to try to really shrink that incarcerated population to protect everyone that we possibly can from the spread of coronavirus. And again, this is really a situation where we have to look ourselves in the mirror as prosecutors and say, are we only trying to, serve in the courtroom, or have we looked at the greater duty as public servants to serve inside and outside of the courtroom, and to really look at public health and safety of the members of our community and their families. And to me, I think this is the time where we have to look in the mirror and say, why are these people even incarcerated in the first place? Why are these people being held without bail in the first place? Are we still in a situation where we are, utilizing cash bail in an inappropriate way? Are we still in a situation where we are trying to incarcerate our way into safety, and we know that that's not going to work? And so I could go on forever, but I think the number one thing is to really acknowledge that this is a time for collaboration. This is a time to step outside of our comfort zones. This is a time to collaborate with law enforcement, with the courts, with anybody who is willing to get in the trenches, with our public housing authorities, with anybody who can help with food insecurity for people who may get released, or housing insecurity. It's the time to collaborate. The ideas have been put out there, but now it's time for prosecutors to get with defense attorneys and anybody else who will work with us and pick up the ball and run. So I'm open for any question, but I just want to, completely acknowledge and embrace that prosecutors, we do play a very serious role here, and trying to undo some of the harms of the past and the harms that could go forward because of the number of people that are incarcerated as a result of some of the work that prosecutors have done.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Commonwealth Attorney Morales. It's really incredible to hear you say that. And I'm sure we'll have follow-up questions, but really appreciate you joining us and your words. So our last speaker, last but certainly not least, wearing my favorite lipstick of the day, is Brittany White, the decarceration manager with the Live Free National Campaign. Thank you so much, Brittany.
Hi, it's a pleasure to join my colleagues today. Once again, my name is Brittany White, and I'm representing the Live Free campaign with Faith in Action. The Live Free campaign is committed to reducing gun violence, doing police training, and reducing mass incarceration across this country under the leadership of Reverend Michael McBride. It is my absolute pleasure to be a part of this conversation as another formerly incarcerated Black woman. I dream every day of the liberation and reduction of incarcerated people in this country. So my hope to contribute to this conversation is really just to give perspective of the day-to-day life of incarcerated people. I spent my time that I was incarcerated in the state of Alabama. And during that time that I was incarcerated, one of the women I was at the work release with actually died from a staph infection. And so during this time, I'm thinking about how that particular instance was handled. And what is important to introduce to the conversation is we've had a lot of discussions about the lack of access to hand sanitizer because of alcohol content. But it's very important to also let folks know that many incarcerated people do not have access to bleach, to disinfectant. These are often withheld from people who are incarcerated, which helps to promote the unsanitary environment that people function in. And so I cannot have this conversation without highlighting the resilience of incarcerated folks and letting people know that it's a very interdependent community, especially those who are incarcerated in dormitory style institutions. Many people within those in those dormitories are relying on each other for food. So if I have a pack of noodles and you have sausage, we put that together and that's how we create a meal. Many people eat behind each other in institutions that allow them to smoke. They smoke behind each other, so that heightens and gives perspective to why folks are concerned about the vulnerability and the lack of access to information to let people know what they should be looking for and what they should be concerned about. So I would just like to offer a few best practices, some which have already been lifted up. I am very appreciative of the brilliance of my comrades. So the first thing that I would say is we should call on all governors across this country to eliminate or waive any co-pays or sick call fees. Within many institutions, you have to pay like a $7 to $10 amount of money in order to put in a sick call to be seen. This often discourages the indigent from using those opportunities to put in sick calls, and they just push through. We should release all people from solitary confinement. That way that we can have community oversight to make sure that those who are complaining of symptoms are actually being seen. We as a community should be engaging with our loved ones and our networks who are incarcerated. When is the last time you have written your people? When is the last time you have put money on the phone to accept those phone calls? Any solutions that we implement at this time to subsidize the fact that many in-person visitations are being taken away, it should be done so with the consideration that these are not permanent solutions. Some of the incarcerated people who I've spoken to at this time are in fear that if we start using iPads and virtual solutions, that they will be permanently put into place and they will lose their face-to-face and their contact visits, which are part of the social support that they need in order to do their sentence as well. We should also call on our state governors to make sure that they are overseeing that incarcerated people are getting access to bleach and cleaning products upon request. It is very difficult to get access to these items, and we need to make sure that it's being done, as well as the actual laundry that they wear is being washed and disinfected in actual soap. I know that this seems very remedial and unnecessary to say, but while I was incarcerated, many of us would not even send our uniforms to the laundry because they would just run it through in water with all of population's clothes, and actual soap was not being used. We should also be mindful that most of these institutions are housed in rural communities. So preparing and ensuring that all the rural hospitals are equipped and prepared to handle any situations in case an outbreak takes place. I would also like to see a plan of action if we are to have the suspicion of an outbreak or an outbreak itself. What do we actually plan on doing to ensure that people are going to be held for safety? There should also be a priority to release elderly people and pregnant women. Yes, there are pregnant women in these institutions that are especially vulnerable and those with compromised immune systems. So I will wind down my time there. Once again, I'm happy to answer any questions and be a part of the solutions. And my heart, my resources, and my allegiance are with incarcerated people. I would like to end by saying that I would love to see mass incarceration thought about as a public health issue. This has shown me more than ever that people who are sitting in prisons are sitting ducks, waiting to be bombarded by sickness without actual solutions. As we move through this current crisis, we must move forward and stand with the most vulnerable and come up with solutions to actively fight to reduce mass incarceration in this.
Thank you, Brittany, and what an incredible way to end our panelists. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm inspired by each of you. I know that the stuff that you all have talked about has really created, people are responding in real time with so much support, and they feel heard, and we really appreciate you all joining us. I'm going to do a quick wrap up, which involves me doing a screen share, so we'll all see how this goes. But I wanted to wrap up with some kind of practical things that elected officials at the local, state, and federal level can do right now, right this second. And right now is the time to act. And so we wanted to lay some of those out. And we've also put together tools for people and organizations to use to tell their elected officials what the community needs right now. And we're collecting resources from our panelists, from people on the chat, trying to bring together, to put them all in one place so that your messages can get out and we can make the change and make the ask that we want to make right now. So I'm going to screen share. This was the scariest part of taking this role, so. Okay, I think I got it. So the first slide lays out what can happen on the federal level right now. And one of the things that we've talked about is we can push President Trump to use his extremely broad, basically unlimited clemency power to release elderly and medically vulnerable people in federal custody right now, unless there is clear evidence that release would present an unreasonable risk to the physical safety of the community. I want to emphasize that we're talking about massive release here, and that we really want to push the president and the federal system to release people. This is an emergency. This is a medical emergency. And as everybody has pointed out, this is a real moment of necessity. And so that's one thing that we wanted to focus on, of what can happen on the federal level. Oh, see? Okay. On the state level, governors in particular can commute the sentences of elderly, medically vulnerable people and other people, unless there is clear evidence that release would present an unreasonable risk to the physical safety of the community. When we say other people, we really mean that broadly. And that's, obviously on the state level, we want to make sure that that's happening as well as on the federal level. The third group, and I think Commonwealth Attorney Morales really spoke to this, what prosecutors can do, right? The enormous amount of prosecutorial discretion to reduce the number of people in the jail and court system, to decline criminal charges whenever possible, to agree to the release of people from custody without bail, and to push to reduce the population of people serving time in the system, or in the system at all, people having to go to court, people having to fulfill requirements for their sentence. We really are pushing prosecutors to use their enormous discretion to reduce the risk to people in the system, and therefore reduce the risk to all of us, right? And then lastly, highlighting what we can immediately ask of police chiefs and sheriffs to use their discretion to limit arrests and warrants and use non-custodial processes whenever possible. This is a community ask, right? And there are more asks that other people on the call have highlighted. These are the basic ones and the ones that we can do right now, but these are things that we can all be calling for and asking for today. So I'm gonna also share quickly our resource page on the TJC website. If you go to thejusticecollaborative.com/COVID-19, which you can see right here, you will see that we have put together, and that will constantly be changing and updated, a page full of resources that drawing from the work of many of the people on the call, places like ACLU, Color of Change, Immigrant Legal Resource Center, and others. And so I wanted to just show you all what's here. Includes demands from different groups across the country. And it also, it includes some fact sheets, it includes some explainers. So a couple of quick shout outs about some of the resources that are here and some of the resources that exist. A quick shout out to the Prison Policy Initiative for their report, No Need to Wait for Pandemics, the Public Health Case for Criminal Justice Reform. It's a really useful resource right now. Fair and Just Prosecution will be issuing an open letter from elected prosecutors early next week, calling on officials to reduce the threat of COVID-19 outbreaks in custodial facilities. And there will be more information about that on the website and in the follow-up. Color of Change has also put together, as always, a fantastic letter, and you can find it at www.humaneoutbreakresponse.org. we'd love it if when you talk about this this call, but also any sort of follow-up or questions you may have, the hashtag Stop COVID-19 in Jails is being used, so please continue to use it. As I said, the Justice Collaborative has put this list of resources together, and we've also set up a tracker, a really big Google spreadsheet, so that we can track specific asks and provide tools to use for advocacy. So we'll follow up with that in both the chat and then in follow up to this call. We've also created a Google form that lets you both give us information and also make requests for policy and communication support. It's posted in the chat. And there's also an email address where you can send inquiries for support or to be connected to other groups. And that's COVID-19@thejusticecollaborative.com. That's COVID-19@thejusticecollaborative.com. So thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to ask a couple of questions before we hop off. Now I just have to find them. Got them. Okay, so the first question we have is from Holly Craig. It's for the Commonwealth's Attorney Morales. She asked, I would love to have some discussion about utilizing sentence commutation, sentence reduction calculations, and compassionate release, though it does not exist formally in all states, and people who have less than 18 months on their sentences anyway to be released. What kind of role can prosecutors play in that, and what are the best next steps to take?
So that's a really good question to ask me, because in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have very limited options about what can be done with respect to sentencing determinations after the initial 21 days that passes after someone is formally sentenced and their order is entered in court. And so for us, what we are doing here on a case-by-case basis is we are going to be making motions before the court about whether the court will reconsider the sentences, not only in traditional cases, but also in probation violation cases, in addition to what I earlier talked about with respect to pretrial motions and things of that nature. And so in Virginia, we're in a really difficult space because there isn't prosecutorial discretion about what happens with matters that have already been convicted. We have to go to the court and ask for them to reconsider, and there's nothing in the law that requires them to do that. And so obviously different states are different. Different states, maybe prosecutors have prosecutorial discretion where they can go back and they can look at not just, when talking about what's happening with respect to the threat for the incarcerated population with respect to coronavirus, but just doing what's right in general and correcting the wrongs of the past and the harms that are continuing to happen now. There are some states where we just don't have the ability to do that. And this is a perfect time to have the discussion around what we do to come full circle as a nation to ensure that we have the ability to correct the wrongs, whether or not we have a national health crisis or not. As a system, we just need to be fixing what we've done and appropriately and working to get it right now that we know that what has been happening is not right. And so in Virginia, we just have to, once again, put ourselves in the trenches, fight on a case-by-case basis. And I've made it very clear to my prosecutors who are in court every single day that you are more than welcome to join in these motions with defense. Don't send our brothers and sisters who stand on the defense side hanging. Don't leave them alone when we know that it's the right thing to do to advocate along with them for compassionate release. And so for us, it's really going to be a daily fight to push ourselves to do what's right every step of the way. But I can't speak to what happens in other states. I just know the difficulty that we have here. But I really think that's a conversation that needs to be had with prosecutors to talk about the power that we have that traditionally has not been exercised to protect people who are incarcerated, but has been exercised to keep people oppressed. So I know that's not, a full answer about what can happen all around the nation, but that's the reality of it, is that whether it comes easier or whether it comes harder, we need to be fighting along with our colleagues on the defense side to get this right for the people who truly don't have a voice and don't have a means of protecting themselves and are relying on all of us to get it right for them.
Thank you, Commonwealth's Attorney. We have a question for you, Dr. Venters. So really two, have you been in any jail or detention center with ICE detainees since the outbreak and been able to see if there are any preparations or the lack thereof? And then the second question is, how are folks currently being held in solitary confinement getting access to care?
So thank you. I haven't been in any ICE detention centers in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I don't believe. I will say that as many people have said, the baseline level of dirt, filth, lack of access to basic infection control, and then the way the physical plants promote spread of communicable disease, none of that's changed in any of these places. So I remain very concerned, even with the mitigation efforts that we'll hear about, I'm sure. I have a real concern about the solitary confinement settings, both as a baseline place where people can get sick and deteriorate without anybody seeing. That happens already, and it drives jail attributable deaths. But also, I'm concerned that solitary gets conflated in this circumstance as some sort of public health measure, that locking people in cells could be a way to stop the spread of disease, when that is not true. It will promote not only the spread of the disease, but we'll lose our ability to find out who is sick and who needs to go to the hospital, and just drive this epidemic curve that we hear about flattening. Those are practices that will drive that curve straight through the roof.
Thank you. I also wanted to add that we will have, ASAP will include some immigration detention and immigration demands on the site that aren't currently there, but will be there, you know, in the very immediate future. So
Yeah.
we'll include those.
I just wanted to add that Detention Watch Network currently has an organizational sign-on around demanding the release of everyone. I've dropped it in the chat box, but I'll also send it to all presenters so that y'all could circulate that. Right. And a couple of templates for call-ins and letters to governors and local elected officials to demand the release of everyone. I also recently got news that, at least for the field office director for the region of the Midwest, has sent notification that they're suspending all check-ins for people who have ICE check-ins between now and June 1st, which shows us that, like, we could push for more and we could be doing more to make sure all of our people are out and not just not being subjected to detention or deportation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara. That's helpful, and we'll make sure to include that on the site too if it's not already there. Quick.
Oh, I'm so sorry. This is Erica from Raices. I just want to make a quick clarification that I just heard from our legal department. Carnes Detention Center, the Family Detention Center, Immigration Detention Center in Texas is still open for visitation. And our attorneys right now are still planning to go next week if nothing changes. And so we will keep everybody posted also on our social media to, you know, just like we pressure the entire immigration you know, ICE, we also want to make sure that we're lifting up the stories of people who are incarcerated, and especially the children and the most vulnerable folks. Just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you so much, Erica. And actually, the next question is for you, so good timing. The question is that people would appreciate any information on people in immigrant detention, but also undocumented people who are in the community right now and feel ill. What they should do, what their next move should be, and who they should talk to.
Oh, that's a really great question. We're still, you know, within Raices, we're still in conversations on how we can really provide the best information to the community. The biggest issue, and this is not a solution, is more of an issue, as a lot of what it is right now, is that, you know, folks are still very afraid of you know, go to the government or go to even sometimes a doctor. And so one of the calls that we're making as well, and, you know, we're also adding our name to the demands of the detention network, is to ensure that there's no ICE raids happening right now, because they're still happening in communities, and that there's no ICE enforcement around hospitals. And for a lot of folks who might not know this, there is actually a lot of cases of ICE picking up people at hospitals when they cannot pay their, you know, before they get released. And so we've had attorneys that have to step in and, you know, figure out how to best, you know, stop the deportation of an individual before ICE literally comes to the hospital to take them. And so we want to ensure that we put as much pressure as possible on ICE to stop those operations. And if the entire country is canceling everything, that also ICE operations are canceled right now. And as far as information to the community, we're right now still working on putting together some educational materials. So, you know, we can post them on social media and that we can get the community to know where to go. And, you know, I'm happy to also send along any other information or materials from other partner organizations that have also been working on this.
Thank you so much. So we have a few other questions, but we are hitting our time deadline. And we actually have even more questions that are coming in all the time. So I'm gonna have to end to wrap us up now, but I wanted to let you all know that we'll continue to put information on the site. We'll share the panelists' information about them and their organizations with everybody who has called in, and we'll make it accessible so that people who have other questions, other asks, or want to let us know what they're doing in their communities can follow up. I want to repeat that we have the email address, covid19@thejusticecollaborative.com, and the website, thejusticecollaborative.com/covid19. The spreadsheets are there, the resources are there, including the asks, and so I wanted to make sure I mention that again. If anybody else on the call has something that they want to mention, I'll give Brittany. Yeah, please.
Yeah, one thing that I forgot to say is that also, as far as hygiene goes, indigent people are not required to be provided anything but soap in these institutions. So also wanting to make sure when we put in requests to governors and stakeholders that we're requesting that they be required with their basic hygiene needs, which include deodorant, soap, so forth and so on as well.
Thank you so much, Brittany. I want to thank our panelists for joining us. I can't thank you all enough for coming together and speaking to this audience. We still have like 1,500 people on this call, which is pretty incredible. If my page is refreshing correctly. And I so appreciate everybody joining. Our interpreters have been just incredible, and I so appreciate the work that you all are doing. In general, I know that this is just an incredibly anxiety-producing time. It's scary, it's unprecedented for many of us, and it's also a moment where our communities can come together. I really appreciate what Andrea said about our community being also in prison and jails. They're not separate, they're part of us. And so we want to emphasize that this is a question about shared vulnerability, a question about supporting the people who need our support the most, a question of making our community safer, and of taking this very scary opportunity and using it to reinforce our values and what's important to us as a community. So again, thank you for joining us. I was about to say my name's Josie Duffy, like I was signing off on the evening news, but I guess my name's right there, so you guys all know it. And I really appreciate it. Any follow-up can be sent to the email address or find us on our website, and we'll be sending some information out. So thank you again.